City Council virtual regular meeting for Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. It is 6:30. All right, if we could have a roll call from our city clerk, please.
Mayor Valdez.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Malin.
Here.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Here.
Councilmember Elrod.
Here.
Councilmember Fay.
Here.
Councilmember Grove.
Here.
Councilmember Milliman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much, Colleen. And Sam Fox, the assistant to the city manager, if you could let us know how this meeting will proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of council, staff, citizens, and guests. I'm Sam Fox, assistant to the city manager, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this evening's virtual council meeting. We are streaming this meeting on cable channel 8, Facebook, and on our website, littletongov.org. The agenda will be handled by Mayor Valdez in the same way it would be handled for a regular in-person meeting. As always, citizen participation is encouraged during public comment and public hearings. To participate via phone, please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter the webinar ID 994-7960-4527. There will be one opportunity for public participation this evening during public comments. If you wish to speak during this opportunity, please call in early and stay on the line. Again, the number is 669-900-6833. And when prompted, the webinar ID is 994-7960-4527. When public comment is announced, please press *9 to raise your hand and be recognized as a speaker. Microphones will be muted for all citizens calling in. Citizens can press *9 to raise their hand and be recognized. Speakers will have 3 minutes to address council. The city clerk will announce when you have 30 seconds remaining, and again when your time is up. We expect comments to be civil. Disrespectful or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. For agenda items, Mayor Valdez will ask for a motion and a second, followed by discussion and a vote. Council will vote on agenda items using a thumbs up for a yes vote and a thumbs down for a no vote. The clerk will call each vote with all ayes and nays. Again, if you plan on participating during public comment, please call 669-900-6833. When prompted, enter webinar ID 994-7960-4527. Please stay on the line and press *9 to raise your hand to speak.
Great. Thank you very much, Sama. All right, Council, we're almost through with this meeting already. We're already at the approval of the agenda. And by the way, to Council and our listening audience, we do have a study session immediately following this meeting, the regular meeting tonight. So, Council, do we have any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, it is approved. We'll move on to our comments and reports. We'll start with our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no comments for the regular meeting. I do have several updates that I'll provide council and the public here at the end of our study session.
Great. Thank you very much. City Attorney.
I will join City Manager Ralph when he delivers those comments in the study session.
Great. Thank you very much. Love your background. All right. We'll get down to our council. We'll start with Councilmember Driscoll.
No report.
Councilmember Elrod, then Fay.
No report.
Thank you. Councilmember Fay.
I would like to point out that the having to do with the Highline Canal, our own Public Works Director, Keith Reister, was cited online as saying, the city of Littleton is excited to be among one of the first municipalities to transform the canal for stormwater management. This project has given us the opportunity to be more involved in the maintenance and management of this treasured resource. So what this means is that there is a 1 mile section of the Highline Canal between Windermere and Lee Gulch that is now the responsibility of Littleton, and that stormwater will be going into that section of the canal to be flowing along with the other 71 miles to help protect the tree canopy and other wild things. And the District 3 meeting that I had scheduled so confidently back in January to be this June 20th is canceled. Obvious reasons.
All right, well, thank you very much. And Council Member Grove.
Hello, everyone. I attended a South Suburban meeting last week, and it was a short study session, but they're struggling with a reduction in budget. And so part of what they've had to do is lower the benefits for employees and board members in terms of they were able to play golf for a nominal fee and do go to the rec centers and attend classes. And that has been suspended for at least June and July, and then to be reevaluated. It was an interesting meeting in that many of the board members were in one location at one large table, socially distanced, and then the rest of the members were on the Zoom meeting, and then participants and people that were observing. So it was kind of interesting to see slowly maybe getting back together. They all had their masks on. The other meeting I attended last week was the Next Gen Advisory Committee meeting. It was a Zoom meeting held last Thursday. All 12 members attended. This is a new group. We had, of the 12, 3 were returning. And it took some time. We had a study session so they could get acquainted. They could review what was done over the last year. And then we adjourned into a regular meeting where we elected officers. And the chair is Larry Thompson. The vice chair is Ibsen Epshir. And the secretary is Carly Ottersberg. So we have our new officers. They discussed some topics they wanted to address over the coming year. And before they finalized it, they really wanted to take some time, read the Envision plan, see where Littleton was going over the next 20 years, and then come back and finalize that list. And when that list is done after the next meeting, which will be June 12th, I will then get that to City Council for feedback. And then after this June meeting, they're just kind of playing catch up. Then they'll go back to their first Thursday of the month starting in July. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Milliman.
Good evening, everybody. So I've got 2 updates. One is I met with the museum board last night, and I want to just send huge shout out, kudos to Tim Nitz and his staff for doing such a fantastic job with keeping things moving along as best possible given the circumstances and the number of furloughed employees that they have. But he's done a fantastic job. There's a couple of new folks that have joined the board. They didn't pick their officers last night. Probably at the next meeting, they will go ahead and do so. But a couple of updates. One is the first little baby lamb was born for this season. It's a male. And there are 8 ewes that are still pregnant. So stay tuned. You can check out the museum on Facebook and see all the updated photos of the new babies being born. But an update with the museum, they've canceled all their summer concerts, their June camps, their group tours, a couple of other things. But they are continuing the virtual programming, and it's here to stay as they have found quite a few new audience members who normally wouldn't have been involved with the museum in the past are now very much involved with the museum because of the virtual programming. And also, sorry about my dog barking back there. They're working on a reopening plan, which they're hoping the museum will open around July 1st, and it'll be in 3 staged phases. So more of that to come. And then also I spoke with Doug Tisdale with RTD. He's our representative RTD. And oh boy. So RTD also has taken quite a hit during this COVID crisis. Their ridership is down 70 to 80% metro-wide. However, they do have some good news. There have been no employee layoffs. And they will receive reimbursement of some expenditures from the CARES Act at the end of the year. Doug wanted me to let everybody know buses and light rail are still running, and RTD is doing the best. They're doing a fantastic job with making sure that their operators are protected with all the PPE. They deep clean the vehicles every single night. There's directions on how to enter and exit buses and light rail trains. They're really working on trying to protect the public and their operators as well. And during the recent protests in downtown Denver related to George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, he did mention that there's been no damage to any of the vehicles, physical damage to the vehicles, or any injuries to persons. Today, they started service back up to the downtown area, but they will be following curfew orders. So we'll be closing down around 8 o'clock or earlier. And also, fares are still suspended until further notice. So you can ride light rail and the bus system for free right now. And I think that's about it. Thanks.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem.
Good evening, everyone. Quick report. At the risk of embarrassing her, I want to congratulate Becky Fye on 25 years of service to the city. Becky, as we all know, is the executive assistant to the city manager and the city attorney. That's an incredible milestone. She's an amazing resource to all of us. Thank you very much.
All right. Is that it? Great. Well, thank you. Yeah. As far as the assistant to the city attorney and to the city manager, 25 years is quite a while. She started first. I got a chance to catch up with her the other day, and she started at CML for a few years. Then when she came to Littleton, she worked with Larry Berkowitz, which some of you may know, and as well as Barry Siegel and Brad Bailey's. And so she's been there a long doggone time. So that's pretty cool. And one of the things she had mentioned that when she started with the city, she was amazed at how many people that work for the city are there so long. And then now here it is, she 20 some years later, here she is, one of them. So yeah, that's cool. Thanks for bringing that up, Scott. Appreciate it. And I think the city manager is going to bring up something or discuss the museum a little bit later on tonight. The Highline Canal, and another subject, the Highline Canal did run a little bit of water into Kittring Lake the other last week, I believe it was. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. In the mayor's meeting that I attend virtually, some of the cities are actually looking at opening up sometime in June. They don't know how yet, but some of the councils have a few, maybe 5 council members. Some of them have 9 council members. So they're all trying to figure out the distancing thing, because the distancing part is still key to this whole situation that we're into right now. And maybe the city manager can give us an update on that here in just a minute on do you have an update for that when we may go live? Or what would the word be now? I don't even know, was it physically there?
How about the study session, Mayor? I can provide a little bit of update on.
Why don't we do that? That'll be a good place to go. But this study session, your report better be good is all I can say.
I'm going to need about 45 minutes.
Oh, good. So we'll take that away from Reed's time then. All right. Well, cool. All right. Well, with that,
hey, Jerry,
yes.
Patrick, I didn't say anything about RISE because I thought maybe you were going to mention that. You want to run with that?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'll just let the people know that Jerry and I attended a RISE meeting today. RISE is the group that was established by the city manager to help get the city moving again. Right now, we are anticipating that we will do the weekends on Main beginning June 12th. We were shooting for this weekend, but the merchants voted to delay it one more week to get better organized and make sure they have enough supplies and food and everything needed to do this program. So as of right now, June 12th, we will be shutting down the streets about 3 o'clock. And they'll be shut down through Sunday afternoon. And we'll probably do that for the next couple of weekends and see how it's going, and also wait on Governor Poles' next announcement as to, can we open up fully? Can we have 75% capacity? Whatever that looks like. But right now, that's sort of the game plan. It's not just for downtown Littleton. It's also for Aspen Grove or any other parts of the city that wants to extend their restaurant or their bar out a little bit to make up that 50% capacity. They will need to fill out an application with the city, with Elizabeth. Would she be the best contact, you think, Jerry? Elizabeth?
No, either that or Denise.
Or Denise. Okay, Denise Stevens. Yeah, so there's an application process. Those are going very smooth, very quickly. And I think all in all, everybody's happy to finally be getting out of the home and spending a little bit of money downtown and around Littleton.
And Councilmember Elrod.
Actually, thanks, Pat, for bringing that up, because forgot to mention Paris Street Market is happening at Aspen Grove this weekend, which that may work out quite nicely, that they get to kind of help us open up. So something's still going on of significance this weekend. So
yes,
wanted to mention that. And then actually the other activity that's opening up this weekend on Friday is a live artist talk that is being hosted by the Littleton Museum as well. So we have a couple of really good activities happening this weekend nonetheless.
Great. Now, is at Aspen Grove, Karina, are they doing the farmers market Wednesday?
I don't know about the farmers market, but the Paris Street Market, which is more of like an antique fair, is happening over the weekend.
Yeah, I think they have a farmers market coming up too, if I'm not mistaken. I think they mentioned that today too. And I think our city manager, you're going to hit on that a little bit later.
Yes, that's part of my updates. But as the council is moving along here, I'm cutting my time dramatically here. You guys are covering some of the topics. But
I understand It's June 17th was the date I saw that the farmers market was going to open at Aspen Grove.
Okay. We'll wait to hear from the city manager. He might have an update for us here in just a little bit. Great. All right. We have, and no one else has any other comments. If not, we're going to move to citizens' appearances, of which we have none. So we go down to public comments. It is 6:47 p.m. And if Sama Fox, if you could please inform the audience on how they can participate.
Thank you. If you wish to address the City Council under public comment, please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter the webinar ID 994-7960-4527. Press *9 to be recognized. Citizen microphones will be automatically muted until a citizen is called upon to speak by the last 3 digits of their phone number. Please state your name and district or address clearly for the record. A reminder, the clerk will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining and again when your time is up. Public comment is an opportunity to express opinions or ask questions regarding issues that are not part of public hearings on tonight's agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. The city clerk will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining and again when your time is up. The City Council is not authorized by the Colorado Opens Meetings Law to discuss, comment, or take action at the meeting on any issue raised by public comment that is not part of tonight's agenda. The mayor may refer the matter to city manager or city attorney for immediate comment after public comment, or to staff to obtain additional information and report back to council as appropriate. We expect comments to be civil. Disrespectful or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. Mayor, we currently have callers on the line. I'd just like to remind people to press *9 if you would like to raise your hand and be recognized for public comment.
All right. And you, Sama, are you the timer, the 3-minute timer, or is Colleen doing, our city clerk doing that tonight?
Colleen, our city clerk, is doing that.
Okay.
And we have our first caller with their hand raised. Caller with the last 3 digits of 819. You have been unmuted. Please begin speaking.
Hi, City Council. This is Pam Chadbourne. I live in District 1, a block and a half from City Center. First, I'd like to thank you for considering the designation of the post office as a historic landmark, and I urge you to approve it. I'm going to make an observation. I'd like the city to fix the curbs along the sidewalk of the property. They're pretty crumbly, and I saw a lady stumble in one of those breaks in the curb, so please fix the curbs there. Second, a comment about the solid waste discussion at last week's study session. Just a note, I'm hoping you will not assume that somebody's read the meeting material. Often the material that you council members have seen, we the public have not. It's not in the packages before the meeting. So please just kind of let us know what the general topic is and some of the issues, and then discuss. I'd like to react to the District 1 representative's statement that hiring trash service is government overreach. It is not. That's a personal point of view. It is not one that is used to guide your public service on council. Public service is achieved by introducing facts that we all can see that relate to how a specific choice impacts the city, the people, the assets, the infrastructure, the services, the budget, the quality of life, in short, current and long-term timeframes. And it has nothing to do with personal views about government's roles. So the discussion never addressed what I think is a driver. How much does the population of Littleton pay now for trash service? And how much would we save if the city hired a couple of trash companies as primary contractors for 2 or 3 years? And that's the driver. I hope that that will be introduced in the study session. That's what we need to know. This has nothing to do with defeating competition. Competition would occur every couple of years. This would be much more environmentally responsible. Instead of having 7 companies driving around all the streets, there would only be 2. And don't you want to save half the people in Littleton $20 per quarter? I mean, that's what this could be. You should want to understand how much you're going to save us. That's a driver for this decision.
Pam, 30 seconds.
Thanks. The code policy questions that you're considering in the study session should not feel comfortable to you. With an adequate comprehensive plan, we would already have a feasible definition of the forms and character of every block. You don't have the data you need to make these decisions. They should already be in the comp plan. We need an integrated, feasible city plan at the city level based on population goals over time. And then we can make the trade space to figure out what we want to do.
Time is up.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Sam, our next caller, please.
Mayor, there are no other callers in the queue.
Okay. It is now 6:53, and I will close the public comments. And if we could move on to our consent agenda. All right, so we have 2 items on our consent agenda. Sam, I don't think you don't have anything that you need to move. Yes, you do. If you could just give us another, the process.
Of course, consent agenda items may be adopted by a simple motion. All ordinances must be read by title prior to a vote on the motion. Any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of a council member.
Great, thank you, Sarah Fox. As I said, we have 2 items on our consent agenda. The first item is 6A, Ordinance 23-2020, approving the designation of the Littleton Post Office located at 5753 South Prince Street as a historic landmark. Second item, 6B, approval of the May 19, 2020 virtual regular meeting minutes. Council, I'm looking for a motion.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve consent agenda item A, ordinance 23-2020, approving designation of Littleton Post Office, and consent agenda item B, ID number 20-150, approval of the May 19th virtual regular meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we have Mayor Pro Tem is the second. Council, no discussion. Let's go right to a vote. The thumbs up is approval and thumbs down is opposed. All right.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great. Thank you very much. We have no general business tonight. We have no second readings tonight. And I think with that, we'll go into our study session. So I'll go ahead and we'll adjourn this meeting at 6:55. Council, does anybody need a break yet? Okay, let's go ahead and take 5 minutes. We'll resume at the top of the hour, 7 o'clock. Thank you. Great, thank you. I'd like to open up the City of Littleton City Council virtual study session for Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. It is 7:01 p.m. And all council members are available right now except for Councilmember Driscoll, who stepped away, and I believe he'll be back in just a moment. Council, we have on our agenda one item tonight, and that is ID number 20-149. That's the Unified Land Use Code Downtown Phase 2 Policy Discussion Part 2. And I believe the way we're going to do it with our consultant tonight, Candid Keys, is that each slide will be time for questions. So there's not a lot of slides, but I think at each one we'll go ahead, and that's when they would like us to go ahead and just pose our questions or comments at that time. And at that, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. Actually, I won't really have much of an introduction. I'm going to ask Kathleen Osher from the City Manager's Office to kind of kick us off. And with that, Kathleen.
Good evening, members of council, and good evening, Mayor. I just had a couple of updates before we get started with this evening's discussion. As many of you know, when we made the change to begin Phase 2 amendments to our existing city code, that's caused a little bit of a change in our schedule. And we feel like it's important to keep the focus on downtown. So that will mean that we'll move out our next third division studio a little bit later. We're in the process of developing a schedule for that, but we think it'll be helpful to keep the conversation focused on downtown, particularly because we'll be releasing those Phase 2 amendments to the existing city code starting July 1. And we'll be able to have that conversation with the community through the month of July, and then look at that third studio, which would take us into a conversation about mixed use and corridors. We're striving really hard to keep our website and project site up to date. It becomes a great resource if you have any questions, if you're hearing questions from constituents and need to reference that project schedule, it is all up to date. And again, you only need to remember envisionlittleton.org. And again, that can be a great resource. Couple of things to note: the summaries of both our studios, 1 and 2, as well as our recording themselves, are available on that project website. So again, good reference points. Now tonight, we're looking for direction from the members of City Council, and this direction will help us in our next step. So we'll take your direction this evening and use it as input to determine the economic viability of projects with our work. You may remember that we brought on board consultant EPS to help us with a project viability model. Now, this project viability model will be the focus of our next joint study session, which will be a combination of City Council and Planning Commission, and that's scheduled for June 30th. So super important discussion tonight, and we're looking forward to Brett taking us through each of those policy questions and sort of guiding that conversation with council. So at this point, I'd love to turn it over to Brett Keast, and then I think Brian Mabry on his team is going to run the slides. So if we can go ahead and share those, Brian, and then Brett, I imagine Nori may step in as well. So you'll kind of guide us through that.
And just for the record, Mr. Driscoll has joined us, so we have full council.
All right, and we have both Brett and Nori.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Terrific, thank you, Mayor. Well, Mayor and council members and members of staff and public that are with us this evening, thank you for participating. As many of you know, this is yet another opportunity where we are coming to the community to help us to define what steps need to be taken to prepare regulations for downtown that will deliver the vision of downtown and the type of development and redevelopment that you envision in the coming years. We originally had a studio back on March 23rd, where we began this conversation after a great deal of study and analysis. We then followed that up with another studio on May 18th, And following that studio, we had the first session with you, council members, on May 19th. So this is the fourth such meeting that we have had where we've come to the public and tried to spell out some parameters and ask for some guidance and direction so that we know the best way to proceed in drafting the regulations. So as was mentioned, we do have a series of slides. We're going to go through what we've identified as being kind of the core policy questions that we'd like your direction for. And then from there, we will use that to draft. I want to have everybody keep in mind that we'll be releasing a draft around the 1st of July. So this isn't the last opportunity we'll have as a community to have conversations about what we feel is best for the community. So I will introduce each of these policy questions. Council members can have any discussion. And then at the end of each discussion, I'd like to see if we can just have a straw vote, if we will. Nothing official, just so we have some general guidance about consensus of the council moving forward. Brian, can you turn to the next slide, please? The other thing I'd like to say is to thank those council members that provided us written feedback following our last meeting. So we have got quite an extensive file thus far of all the input that we've received, and all of that is being used as we're preparing these regulations. So the first policy question that we have pertains to Main Street. And as you recall, we're talking about different building types. And then each of those building types have standards that relate to their form and height and scale and where they sit on the property, so forth. So the question here is, on Main Street, should we or should we not permit a building that is all residential use? In other words, there would be no mixed use, there would be no first floor retail, it would be just 100% residential. So that is policy question number one.
Great, thank you. And Tyler, how will we be doing the questions? Will I be able to see the council members at this point? If not, council, let's go ahead and we'll start with let's go council member Milliman. You have any questions yet?
Questions, but do you want our responses to these questions?
Look, and if you have a question, statement, anything you want to make regarding this first question.
I think it's only appropriate to have mixed-use buildings on Main Street. I think there's already one building on Main Street, I think it's on the corner of Prince and Main, if I'm not mistaken, where there's retail on the main level, and then there's apartments above that. So I think it's more appropriate to have sort of that mixed-use building on Main Street, and not just the single-use residential.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And let's go to Pam.
I agree with Kelly, absolutely not. This would break up the pedestrian experience. We do have some first floor establishments. They're not retail or a restaurant. And I think that's something that office buildings, kinds of things on the first floor are not appropriate for the ambiance we're trying to build in this downtown area.
All right, let's go to Carol, then Karina.
I agree with Pam. Ambiance dictates that we not do this.
Great. Karina?
Same. We should not have single use.
All right, Patrick.
I'm in agreement with the rest of the council members. I think keeping in character with downtown, I think it is imperative we continue to add retail with potential apartments above, similar to what we see on Prince and Main just to the east there. So yes, I would agree with the rest of the council.
Great, thank you. Scott?
No, I emphatically do not think we should permit single-use residential products on Main Street for all of the reasons that council has already articulated. Plus, we need sales tax revenues, and that's incredibly valuable real estate. we can't have it just generating property tax revenue.
Okay. And I'm saying should not retail on the first floor is what we need. All right. Anything else? All right, we'll go to question 2.
You put the slide back up for us to see.
Thank you.
So first, thank you to all of your input there. That was exactly what we need. So we appreciate that direction. So the next question, again, relates to Main Street. And it is whether or not you agree that we should maintain a 2-story building wall that is at the sidewalk, similar to the photo that you see there, and with a 3rd story that would be stepped back from the frontage, so that we maintain a consistent building wall height along Main Street.
All right, that is our question. If we can have council back up again. And this time, let's just, we're going to start with Patrick. Yeah.
Yes, I'm okay with that. I think that's keeping in character with the downtown right now, Main Street particularly. Yes.
Great. Thank you. And let's go, Karina.
I'm also in agreement with this one. It should be 2 stories with this step back for the 6th floor. That is the majority of what we see in downtown now, and also the concern if we were to go 3 stories, it affects the sunlight on Main Street as well. So I think 2 stories is the way to go.
Great, thank you. And Carol.
Yes.
Good enough, Carol. All right, Pam.
Yes, but I also think it should be done correctly. I think in the picture you see that you can see the 3rd story and kind of it affects the streetscape, where when you look at Littleton, which has a 3rd story, it's stepped back so far that it's a large building, but it doesn't affect the ambiance in the streetscape. So I think it's very important to have the appropriate sight line from the street and not have it too close to the edge of the building.
Great, thank you. Kelly.
Yes, I would agree with this as well. I like what they call it a bank building that's on the westernmost end of Main Street. I thought they really did a nice job with making that a 2-story and the 3rd story step back.
Great, thank you. All right, Scott.
Yes, though I wanted to ask the consultants how this implicates the question of a minimum building height.
Good question.
Lori, did you want to tackle that?
I'm sorry. I heard something about building height, but there was something broke up.
Scott, could you go ahead and repeat your question? And then I'm going to add to your question because my comment's much like yours. Go ahead, Scott.
I said yes, there should be a 2-story building wall with a step back. But I wanted to ask how that implicates the conversation about minimum building height.
Yeah, and then to add to that, to my part on that, Nori, was that yes to the 2-story with a 3-story setback, but for me it's 3-story max. But if you could take on Scott's question.
Okay, yeah, that second part is I think coming up in some of the next slides. But yes, we want to take a look. Right now, what we're talking about is simply the number of floors or stories. But you are correct. There is an accompanying regulation which sets the actual maximum building height in terms of feet. And that number still needs to be set at a dimension that would assure that the first floor is a well-proportioned first floor, so that we don't have 3 floors squeezed into a height limit that really was envisioned for 2-story buildings. So we will be studying that number after we now have your guidance tonight.
Great. Thank you, Nor.
I have a question, Jerry.
Yes, Pam.
And this may be more appropriate at another point, and let me know that. But right now, that end of Main Street, that block, and across the street, the one we're looking at and across the street are B2, where the rest is CA and have a different height difference. Are we going to, will the code cover it, or do we need an overlay or a code change? How does that work? Because B2 right now allows for much higher buildings than what we're talking about, but CA doesn't.
The regulation says we are, oops. It's like I'm muted.
No, I hear you, Brett.
Okay. Got a message that popped up on my screen. So for each of the character areas, we have building types, and then we have the heights that are established. So there will be height differences between Main Street and the mixed use area. So we have been, in fact, staff has done some analysis that we received today that is looking at the actual building heights throughout downtown. And we're comparing those with the allowable heights of the current zoning districts. So we can try to reconcile between the building types and the heights relative to, you know, what is now allowed and what's on the ground. Does that make sense?
And Brett,
are we going to be able, I guess my question is, are we going to be able to have, right now B2 has unlimited heights and we wouldn't want to change that outside of downtown, but will the new code keep the building heights similar to the rest of the buildings on Main Street, even though B2, it's zoned for B2 right now?
Yes, we envision creating a district for downtown that will be separate from B2, so that B2 or whatever it ends up being will apply outside of downtown. But within the downtown district, we will have height limits that are based upon the building types and the stories and feet that we've been discussing here.
Thank you.
And Brett, will that conversation include maximum heights as well as minimum heights?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Are we ready to move on to question 3?
Okay. So we have been coordinating with the city's consultant EPS, who, as you know, has already done some work, and we're working with them relative to the economic viability of downtown. So we're working in parallel course right now, and we're doing so to really get another perspective of this. You know, from our perspective, we're looking at it relative to physical form and context and character, but the added dimension to this is going to be the economic viability. So that is why we're kind of exploring some of these topics as to, you know, heights and bulk and things of that nature. So just wanted to kind of set that context for some of these questions. So policy question number 3 is whether you agree that 4-story buildings are appropriate in the downtown mixed use character area. Now, this is not along Main Street. This is the areas that are off of Main Street that we'll show you a map here coming up. That's the mixed use area, provided the 3rd and 4th stories would be stepped back, similar to what we just looked at. And also they would be stepped down in height when they're adjacent to, you know, buildings that are 2-story or they're adjacent to another sensitive edge.
Great.
And the areas that are highlighted in yellow here are the areas that we have discussed being the downtown mixed use. On the left-hand slide, there is the area north of Main Street that was raised by council last time as to whether or not it should be in the downtown mixed use or the downtown transition. That is coming up on a subsequent slide. So we'll talk about that separately.
Thank you, Brett. All right. So if we can go into questions, let's go ahead and start with Karina, if we could, please.
I do have some questions here. So I do think that 4-story is appropriate in mixed use. My concern is mixed use is a really big part of all of downtown. So I can't, my answer would be based on the outline of where mixed use is now, I would have to say no, because I'm concerned about where those boundaries are and where this 4-story exists. The other thing I noticed I didn't understand some of the height assessments that were shared with us and how we should account for those in this discussion, Brett. So if it's relevant to bring it to this discussion now, if you can share or explain to us what those height assessment PDFs were that were sent to us, that would be helpful. So I think mixed use should be 4 stories, but I think mixed use is there's too much of it in downtown right now, and in areas where it should not be 4 stories.
Okay. The regulations that we're envisioning drafting will be set for each of the 4 character areas, and then the actual boundaries of those character areas won't necessarily affect what's being drafted. It will just say that, the regulations that are drafted will apply to whatever areas are finally decided. So I think the boundaries is a fair question and something that can be looked at, but adjusting those boundaries, at least I can't think of anything, nor unless you have something different, that it wouldn't slow us or, cause any additional work. It'd just be some mapping work.
I think an important piece of information that was also shared with us in an email today was the current height range that we have today. And as we've talked, we want to say in character or respect the character of what is there today. 80% of those buildings are 3 stories or less. So that's more than, that's a pretty significant majority. So height is an indicator of.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right, Carol. And then Pam.
I think this question goes to probably Kathleen as the person who heads up this whole endeavor. How is it we got to this point where the first time I, as a council member, heard the reason for a 4th story, that being economic viability, as tonight? That's the first time I heard that. And the first time I heard about a 4th story was, I believe, last week, as a given rather than as a question. How did we get there? What was the process of not involving council in that decision?
What we're basing this conversation on is what the current zoning allows, which in some cases there are no restrictions on heights. And in some cases, height is a maximum of 30 feet. And in some cases, it's a maximum of 40 feet. Jennifer may like to add some things. I know that her staff has been doing some work on some analysis of height, but that's really where that's come into play. And Brett and Nori, I don't know if there's something that you might add as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's a question of, that it's a given at all. I think we're at the point in drafting where we need to decide, what number do we fill into the table? Is it 3 or 4 stories? It's really a community decision. So we'll write the standards however we need to write the standards. With the pending work that EPS is doing, I just wanted to kind of bring everybody up to speed on that work and how it will dovetail together with the work that we're doing on the regulations. So it's certainly not a given by any stretch. So that's why we're here tonight.
Back to Kathleen. What was the question of a possibility of a 4th story, something that was in the Citizen Envision survey or conversations last summer?
Well, I don't know that we ever got to the specifics of height, but I think that we are very cognizant of what the current zoning does allow and still being respectful of those property owners' rights. So I think that's, why we're continuing to think about what does the current zoning allow for, and then how do we begin to blend in the feedback that we got based on character and those definitions of character and the additional feedback that we've gotten from the studios. And so trying to reconcile those, yeah.
Picking up on your use of character, going back to that community character, which has been a strong theme, appropriately so, in all of these conversations. How many 4-story buildings do we have already that establish a community character, the precedent of 4-story buildings in the downtown area?
Yeah, can I ask Jennifer to weigh in? I know her staff has worked on that analysis, and I think she's prepared to talk us through that. Hi, Jen.
Hello, good evening. So Brad, I had shared with you, we did do analysis based on GIS data that we have that breaks down the number of buildings that we have by height. So if you, Brett, do you have that handy from what I emailed you?
Jennifer, I would like to interrupt here. I'm much more concerned about stories right now. What I'm asking about is stories rather than height. I think that's what citizens key in on. It's what I key in on, that's for sure. So could you answer in terms of stories, how many stories, 4-story buildings do we have in the downtown area now?
Let me pull up that chart. So if we want to continue going around with the other questions, I will pull up that chart.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back to Carol again. Let's go to, we'll come back to you, Pam, or Carol, when she gets a chance to get that here. We'll go to Pam, and then we'll go to Kelly, then Patrick.
From walking around, and I can't tell you specifically, the only 4-story building that I ever noticed was one building where they subverted the top and somehow snuck in a 4-story. Our downtown area is 3 stories, and I don't know why we would want to change that character. I understand economic viability, but if we want to keep economic viability is based on the character of our downtown. And if we subvert that even more than it's already been subverted, then I think we're running into trouble. So my question is, I do not agree, but I do have a question. You talk about step backs and step downs when adjacent to a sensitive edge. Does that mean if it's a small bungalow type, single family dwelling, we can't have any more big buildings right next to it, or am I wrong?
Noe, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I think the idea is that it would have to be a defined boundary line. So it's either a different character area, that is, you're abutting the residential neighborhood character area where the scale is intended to be lower, or you're abutting an historic landmark or an historic district boundary where the scale is lower. So it would be a defined boundary, not just a single family house that happens to still remain in the mixed use area, character area.
So you're saying it would be by character area?
Yes.
And I'm struggling with a couple things, and I might as well bring them up now because they'll come out sooner rather than later. Why do all our examples look so big and massive when our heritage is smaller? I understand it's allowed now, but I think our character of our downtown, a lot of it has been lost by these huge lot line to lot line, massive structures, and now we're looking at more, and I don't get that.
And I have 1 second here. If Tyler, I think you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah, sorry, this is Tyler, Technical Director. Brett, could I get you to lower your speakers or move your phone away just a hair? I'm getting a little tiny bit of feedback from you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, Pam, go ahead and continue that question.
Well, I guess that's more for why are we going the way of these huge, massive buildings when the character of our downtown and our heritage is not that way? I mean, every example we've seen since we started this has been so big and massive, with the exception of a couple residential examples.
Good. Kelly?
No, I'm looking for an answer, Jerry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, did you want to address that?
It's certainly not intentional to be illustrating massive buildings. I think part of it is the aerial viewpoints that we've been using so you could see the overall building mass, but it isn't the way you experience it on the street. What we're anticipating is standards that would divide a larger building up into smaller modules that do reflect the traditional scale of downtown buildings, which are typically 25 to 50 foot wide facades. And so we're working on the idea of standards that would break up a larger building into those smaller modules. And I think the views selected maybe don't convey that as well as they should. We also still haven't really brought in lot coverage limitations that could affect some of that. We have some general ideas that we're working on for lot coverage, but that's something that actually is going to be another discussion topic coming up here in a moment in terms of what constitutes open space, because that will influence also how big the buildings are. There is a third factor, though, that we are introducing and we're working on, and that which doesn't exist now, and that is setting an absolute maximum length of a building for the character areas that is smaller than what some of the larger buildings are that have appeared recently in Littleton.
Yeah, so I think structurally some of the buildings may be larger, but physically and aesthetically, they won't be something that's picked up on because of the way they are designed by building different modules and using different materials and colors and things of that nature. So economically, you can build a larger building, but the experience is that it does not appear, it does not seem to be a larger building. And I also have, Nora and I've talked about the views that we've selected tend to show you a bird's eye view, which nobody ever has, which is good for seeing a large area through a planning process like this. But we want to show more street level views so you have a better feel of what your experience will be driving through or biking through or walking through some of these areas.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Kelly, questions?
So I want to revisit these words, character and heritage, for Littleton. And I think that there's a lot of emphasis on our downtown, which, yes, I know is a big focal point of Littleton. But I also look at Western Welcome Week, Bemis Library, the Littleton Museum, the River Corridor. Those to me all make up the heritage or the character of our city. And I'll go back again. What downtown Littleton looks like back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, looks vastly different today because over time, patterns change, architecture changes, number of people living in our city changes, and we're a growing city. And we have a need for housing. We have a downtown that we want to keep economically viable so that our city stays viable. So to me, and I thank you for laying out these character maps of a downtown neighborhood transitions, mixed use to Main Street. Those transition zones are great places where if you have the downtown neighborhood where you have the single family homes, transition into more multi-family housing, and then transition into mixed use development. And for me, I'm okay with 3 and 4 stories, especially if they're set back, if you can, I don't want to say demand, but if you have those guidelines for developers, the architects to design those buildings to fit in with the character of whatever that area is within the downtown area. And quite frankly, I think we need more housing. We need more density near those transit areas, light rail, the bus routes. I'm reading a lot about walkable cities and how vitally important they have become even within this COVID environment. People want to live in an area where they can walk and they do have those open spaces. I think we can have those buildings and have those open spaces to give those people a chance to get out and breathe and not have them piled one on top of the other. But I'm okay with 3 and 4 stories in mixed use, in the mixed use areas.
Patrick?
I agree with Kelly. Well said. I'm good with it for at this point in the conversation.
Great. All right. Scott?
Yeah, I think for me, this question's a little premature. I think empirically, statistically, the character of our downtown is 3 stories. And I think if you put the question to the community just like that, do you want bigger versus smaller? Everybody's going to say smaller, right? I'm going to say smaller. But I'm not going to allow myself to fall into this mode of, smaller is always and necessarily better, right? What we're talking about is the future thriving and the future success of not just our downtown, but our beloved Littleton, right? And we owe it a more 3-dimensional analysis than should it be smaller, should it be bigger, right? We haven't heard information from the economic feasibility study, right? We haven't talked as a council about how we're going to handle the downtown transition zone. Are we going to enlarge it? Are we going to shrink it? And so on. There is a scenario where that mixed use along Church, I would be okay with a 4th story, but I think I'm missing some information. So for now, I'm going to say no, I'm not okay with the 4th story.
All right. Thank you, Scott. And I think for me that I'm a no, that because I'm a 3-story max, and that's even with setback. And that would be that's for Main Street and north of Main Street. On the south of Main Street, more like the Alamo and Rap, I'm willing to consider that and make it a yes at this point. So I'm a no and a yes as far as going over 3. But I'm willing to consider something in that particular area on the north that you've highlighted. But right now, I'm still leave it at 3. Okay. Ready for any other questions? Oh, Carol, you're going to come back to Carol.
Jerry, if I could jump in, this is Jennifer.
You bet.
So I have that breakdown on the height, and Carol, to your point, so the number of stories is a hard one to base the GIS data that we have right now on. But typically when you get to 4 stories, you're in that 40 and above is what a 4-story building is. So we basically have 17 buildings in the downtown area, our downtown study area, that are 4 stories and more. You can see a majority of our buildings are in that 1 to 3-story range.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for getting that information. All right, if we can move on to our next question.
I just wanted to make a couple points real quickly. Keep in mind that the 3D model that we're building will be going forward. So any development proposal that comes will need to be submitting a 3D model. So you can put it into the larger downtown model, and council will be able to evaluate it 3-dimensionally. So not just looking at 2-dimensional paper drawings. So that will be helpful. And the other thing that we've talked about is not allowing it 4 stories by right necessarily, but maybe by choice of the council. You'd have a decision of whether or not, based upon what's submitted, you would accept a 4th story. So that would be another alternative potentially. Okay, policy question 4. Maybe we know the answer to this from the conversation we just had, but the policy question is, may a 5-story building site be available by conditional approval of the council, provided there's a lot of considerations of design, location only within a certain character area, its economic viability or impact, what have you. This same thing could apply to a 4-story, perhaps, if you wanted to consider that. So that's policy question number 4.
Great, thank you very much. All righty, we'll go ahead and we'll start with me this time, and then we'll go to Scott, and then we'll work our way that way again. I think on this one, question 4, and similar to my last response, I'm a yes with the 3 stories north of Main Street, and I'm a yes to south of Main Street too. But south of Main Street, I'm willing to consider more than 3 stories, but going north at this time, I'm still kind of stuck on the 3. Thank you. We'll go to Councilmember Pro Tem.
No, to a 5th story, 1, because it's out of character, but 2, and I think for me, an important part of this question is the procedure, right, that it's asking about. Should council be able to allow a 5th story as a conditional use, right? So much of what we want to achieve with the ULUC is predictability, because in the past, the communities have been rightly frustrated with unpredictability. I do not think that we should allow council to make conditional uses, certainly not of this kind. So I'm a no to both things.
Okay. Yeah, and just to be clear, I was a no, but I was a yes if it was 3 stories. But yeah, I agree with you on that, Scott. Thank you, Kelly, and then Pam.
I struggle with this one because of the two words conditional approval of the council. I think I could be a yes on this for approval by council, provided it did meet some of these criteria, specifically economic viability and fiscal impact to the city. So a lukewarm yes.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, Pam, and then Carol.
I'm an emphatic no. I want to see 3 stories throughout downtown. There's plenty of places in Denver where multiple stories, 5+ are very appropriate, but not on our historic downtown area and adjacent areas. I agree with Scott. I do not think we should have exceptions that just invites everybody to come before council or planning commission or whatever, and that subverts our whole code and the whole intent that we're trying to do. Councils change over time, planning commission changes over time, and I just think it's a heavy burden on our staff as well as future councils.
Okay. Thank you, Pam. Carol, then Karina, then Patrick.
I very much don't want 5 stories. I think of right away when we talk about council being able to allow this kind of thing as kind of an exception, is that it opens up our current and future councils to being campaigned by people who want exceptions. And then most important, like Scott said, we want the predictability of both for the developers. I remember when Brett talked to us more than a year ago, he says, developers are looking for predictability. And I just was so reassured to hear that, because that should give us confidence to be predictable. And then I would like to say once again, I don't know how we got to a 5th story without my noticing we got to a 5th story. Brett, could you explain that?
The regulations. So this was just a crossroads, if you will, where we wanted to put before the council just to, test what sensitivities you have and whether or not you feel like there are any areas within any portion of downtown where you could foresee there being 4 or 5 stories. So there's, like I said, there's been nothing drafted that would suggest that that's where these are going. We're just simply asking the question. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Karina.
I'm a no on this as well for all of the reasons that several council members have shared. And what I will add is, on the conditional use and that whole process that introduces subjectivity. And while from an economic viewpoint, maybe at that point in time, a very strong business case can be brought forward to say, here's what the potential impact can be. Conditions can change in 10 years and 20 years, and now we have a 5-story building with potentially a different use and without that economic impact any longer. So I am a no on this.
Thank you, Karina. Patrick.
And I'm a yes on this, and I say that because I think of a piece of property right next to Arapahoe County building that will be going in, a hotel there. 5 stories there would be fine. It doesn't affect anybody's view. It doesn't affect anything other than it's a 5-story building, and that's the exception to the rule right there. That we all want to think about Main Street and 2 blocks in either direction, but there are certain areas within this footprint that would allow, or it would make sense. That's, frankly, maybe the only example I could think of right now, but because of that one example I gave you, I would say yes.
All right, thank you, Patrick. All righty, Brad, you got a kind of a mixed review on that one.
Yeah.
But a lot of no's. But, all right.
Yeah, nonetheless, that's very helpful. And when you put it together with the 4-story discussion, I think that gives us a good idea.
All right. If we can move on to our next question.
Okay, this is what I was referring to before. At the last time we spoke, there was a question as to whether or not the area on the north side of Main Street between Curtis and Nevada should be downtown mixed use or whether it should be downtown transition. Before we put that out there, Nori, would you like to expand a little bit about what the difference would be if that were to change from mixed use to transition?
Well, of course, we have several puzzle pieces in play here in terms of what would be the limitations in the mixed use versus the downtown transition. But the general concept is that the downtown transition area reflects some of its heritage as having had a single family character at one time, but is transitioning to a mix of uses that accommodates residential, but also commercial. So what we're thinking is that the downtown transition area requires a little bit more open space or permits a wider range of setbacks along the frontage than the downtown mixed use area would. And also it would require a percentage of building forms to have sloping roofs to echo those traditional residential buildings. And that'll be another question coming up here in a minute. There would be more open space forms that are more like the residential character than what we're headed toward with the mixed use area. And I think the initial concept for this hole in the donut, if you will, was that it already had changed to a certain extent and therefore probably would fit the downtown mixed use area. But the question posed was, is there still character there that would merit its being the downtown transition character area?
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and we'll start with Scott.
I'll wait till Tyler brings back the gallery view. Council, yeah. So I definitely lean in the direction of this being a downtown transition zone. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm very keen to see the results of the economic feasibility study, but I think downtown transition.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And then I'll go ahead and chime in at this point too. I'm a no on the north side of Main Street, but when we get to the south of Alamo, I'm a yes. But on the north side, I'm a no at this point. All right, if we could go to Patrick.
I'm a yes on this. Obviously, I think we got to be cognizant of property owners' rights, and but for the sake of this conversation, I'd be a yes.
Great, thank you. All right, Karina, then Carol.
You. So yes, I'm a yes on this. This question was the question I brought up, and in part because that's the purpose of transition from one distinct area to another. And here we're going from Main Street to downtown neighborhood, so a really big jump. So that's one of the, most of the primary reason of this recommendation from my part. And I think the other really nice thing about transition is that it allows the commercial uses, but in a form that is more in character to the adjoining neighborhood. And I think that's a lovely complement and creates some diverse, again, speaks to the diversity that we have in downtown. And while the image that you showed was of Nevada, which is the parking lot, I think, of Branke, we have to also remember Curtis would be part of this, and Curtis is like Graceful Cafe and some of those smaller that still look like residential but are being used by business, and those are very lovely and appropriate that they're in our downtown. So I'm very much in favor of this. I think this was a good way that won out.
Great, thank you. Carol, then Pam.
I go with transition. I think, like Karina was saying, especially of Curtis, where there is a lot of the old character there. It's been imposed upon by the recent development of a multifamily building where a one-story commercial property was, but there's still Terracotta Cafe, as Karina mentioned, the Graceful Cafe. There is a doctor's office that is in one of the little bungalows. You wouldn't even notice that it's an office, really, except for the sign out front. So there is a lot to be there. I think it was last week, recently at least, one of our speakers talked about trying to make our zoning have as few exceptions as possible. And from what I think I learned tonight about mixed use and what we said about downtown, I'm not sure this transfers, at least when we were talking about not having residential on the first floor, then that doesn't really apply to this area because there is so much residential already.
Okay, thank you, Carol. All right, Pam.
Transitional from whatever other council members have said. This is one of the last really authentic areas that's maybe somewhat least effective other than south of Maine in the Alamo area. And there's still some nice residential areas. And it would be wonderful if we could keep them even if they are for commercial use.
Great. Thank you. Kelly.
With everybody's comments too as well. I think that's a perfect area for a transition zone. And I absolutely love how there are restaurants, even my dentist's office, that are kind of interspersed within the residential homes. I think it's completely appropriate for a transition area.
Great. All right, thank you. All right, Brett, we can move to the next question.
Great. Thank you. We have our slide. Okay. We had some conversation last time about roof types, and this question is if you agree with the use and percentages of sloped roof forms in the downtown neighborhood and the downtown transition character area. So if you look at the image here and you look at the numbers, you start to get an understanding about how the percentages apply to the amount of the footprint that would be a sloped roof versus the amount that may be a flat roof.
And the next.
So again, these are areas that are either already residential or where there's remnants of residential remaining, as we just talked about.
and the next slide, I think, shows what we were thinking in terms of the minimum percentages for those areas for some of the residential types. Obviously, for single family, it would be, or duplex, it'd be easier to envision that. And so this is a percentage of the footprint or the upper of the building that would have to have a sloping roof form. And it would apply to the downtown transition area and to the downtown neighborhood. So you would see here that the townhome and the multiplex buildings in the downtown neighborhood have different percentages of sloping roof. That would be the minimum requirement, and the same for the downtown area, for the transition area.
Okay. Thank you, Norrie. All righty, so let's go ahead and Patrick.
This is above my pay grade. I think our planning commission needs to make the call on this, but for the sake of this conversation, yes, I do think we need to have, are you looking for a 1, 2, or 3? Or are you just looking for, do we think it's fair to have or do we think it's right to, require a certain slope on different projects?
Yeah, I don't think we're asking for you to edit the numbers here.
Okay.
No. Just in general, the concept that for these areas that have a residential heritage,
right,
that there be some sloping roof form requirement.
Sure, I would say yes.
Great. Let's go ahead and go to Carol.
Yes, definitely. We need the sloping roof so that it can fit into the existing character. Could you explain, though, either Brett or Norrie, why there is a different amount of sloping roof requirement for different types of buildings, different uses?
Because we think architecturally it's easier, for example, to, in some cases, require a higher percentage for a townhome or the multiplex building than, say, for an apartment building. A 25% sloping roof would effectively screen a flat roof on an apartment building pretty well, without having the entire building literally needing a genuine sloped roof.
Right.
All right. Thank you. All righty, Karina.
I didn't completely follow what the full recommendation was. I would need a little bit more time to understand and study this. I think the concept that they're trying to convey is that different buildings may be more appealing with different slope types. So I can appreciate the intent, but I don't know that it's the right numbers to use. I think the first example where it was a 1,200 square foot building and an 100% slope, that seems very much like this. And we had this conversation a few weeks ago that for some of the one-story buildings in downtown, they actually had a much flatter roof, which was very appealing in some cases. So again, I think the intent of the need for different slopes and roof types based on form makes sense to me. I just don't know that these are the right numbers, or I can't visualize what these numbers look like.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I had trouble with the same chart. If we can go to Pam.
I agree that we should have slope percentages. The higher, the better. As you see in number 2, you get into that flat in the front here where it doesn't cover as much as the building, and you get into that boxy kind of look and feel, which I don't think fits in the way downtown was. I don't know. We've got some of that there now. And I think that's what we're trying to get away from. We're trying to get into more blending. So to me, yes, and the higher the percentage, the better.
Good. All right, Kelly.
I would say yes to as well. And
Kelly, could you lean a little closer to your mic for us?
can you hear me now?
Thank you. I don't know, you gotta talk.
So, I would say yes. I agree with use and percentages of reforms. And I think we had talked about in the downtown neighborhood having a 512 pitch. Is that correct? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then in the transitions and maybe even into the mixed use areas, I would have to see the numbers and the examples too. But I'm okay with different roof styles because that creates different character and not uniformity. So my concern is, again, is if downtown, the whole area looks, everything looks the same, then it's boring. So that's it.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Scott?
I didn't understand this question, so I'm not going to attempt to answer it. I do think that council had a pretty useful conversation about roof slopes in response to the Planning Commission resolution a few weeks ago, and hopefully that gave the consultants some guidance. I suppose also add that there's some other factors that would affect my preference on roof slopes. For example, if a third story is stepped back, is it appropriate in that case to have a less sloped roof form? If a developer wants to trade the city a rooftop garden for a less sloped roof form, those are certainly things I would be interested in hearing about.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, and for me, the percentage chart was difficult for me to kind of comprehend what it all meant. But I'm a yes on that. I do like the variety of roofs and different pitches. I'm not real thrilled about flat roofs, especially downtown and in the football area. I think you're familiar with the football when we say that. But yeah, so I'm good with a variety, but kind of like to stay away from the flats. Great. All right. Go to any other questions on that? Karina?
Just because you made a comment on flat, so we do have to realize there are, thinking about Main Street, those building designs are flat on top. So there probably is a place for flat. I think that's the point of, we should consider different roof heights for different parts of downtown to give it that diversity and character that fits our downtown.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll move to the next question.
Okay, the next question is actually a series of questions. We know that maintaining tree canopy and green volume and just natural landscape is important. So what we've done is we've outlined a number of different types of what might be considered open space. So we just wanted to go through here. I don't know if these will lend themselves to as much conversation. They're more probably yes, no's. So the first question is, when we refer to open space in downtown, do you see that being pervious yards in the downtown neighborhood and downtown transition?
Great, thank you.
That's the first one.
All right, let's go ahead and we'll go with, let's start with Karina, then we'll go Carol.
Yes.
Carol.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
All right. And then Pam, then Kelly.
Yes.
Okay, Kelly.
Absolutely.
All right, Scott. Yep. And I'm a yes also. Cool. All right. Yeah, these ought to be easier.
Yeah, we like those.
What about
the next slide is, does open space in downtown refer to tree and shrub plantings in streetscapes? Basically, that area between the street and sidewalk or front building line.
Great. Okay, and then we're ready to go. Then we'll start out with Carol, then Pam.
Yes.
Pam.
Is this on the property line, within the property, or on the street, or both?
It is probably within the right-of-way in cases like this, because the right-of-way usually extends to the back edge of the sidewalk. Should be the area between the street and the sidewalk in many cases, like the photos show, if they had them up.
I'm okay if it's on the right of way, but I'm not okay if you plant a little shrub and count that as open space on the lot.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Pam. All righty, let's go to Kelly. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking up. Did you say yes?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking down at my chart here. All right, let's Patrick.
Yes.
Karina.
Yes.
Yes. Scott.
Yes, but I want to expand and add, to no one's surprise, that while these are, this group of questions related to open space is about aesthetics and character for me, there's also an ecological component to this, right? That we need to make sure that we're considering, right? What's required for the future ecological health, not just in the downtown area, but of the city, right? I want people planting trees downtown and elsewhere, and I want to make sure that people feel incentivized and welcome to do that. So,
good points. Good point. And I'm a yes. All right, we go to our next one. Ordinance.
Okay, the next one is along Main Street and the mixed use areas where you have buildings that are built at or near the street. If tree wells, similar to what you see in the photographs here, are part of that greenscape. And greenscape might be the better word than open space.
All right, that was easy enough. All right, let's see on that one. I am a yes. Scott? Kelly?
Yes.
I would say yes, if the sidewalk was wide enough for somebody to be able to get their wheelchair, their stroller in between the building and wherever that tree well is. Because if you look on Main Street right now, you got to dodge the trees because they're right in the middle of the sidewalk. They're not very strategically placed. I mean, I love them because they hold the Christmas tree lights and they provide shade and all, but going forward, I would hope that the sidewalks would be wide enough to accommodate the tree and the pedestrian in whatever mode of transportation that they need to use to be able to get around.
Good. Scott, did you want to get back to your comment?
No, that's just that's a really good point that I hadn't considered. And I just wanted to ask either the consultants or the city manager to speak to that. Do the tree wells as they exist now present any kind of ADA compliance issue?
Well, the regulations would be drafted to provide a minimum passable width of, I believe it's 4 feet, to meet ADA accessibility requirements. And so that's always going to be a part of any standard where there is, a need for handicap accessibility.
And Scott, I think your question was, do they present an issue now as they are? Is that what your question was?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think I've heard that they are issues. Okay, so let's.
Jerry Mark's got his hand up.
Mark, thank you, Scott.
So, Mayor, maybe, I've talked to perhaps a couple of council members about the downtown and specifically the location of our trees and even the techniques for which you plant a tree. Some of this may be outside the scope of Kennebec East, but I've been part of cities that have taken a a pretty aggressive approach to how they want trees planted and the location of that. For example, there is a lot of cities are looking at the removal of the sidewalk and say 6, 8, 10 feet or more underneath the sidewalk and place a very specific type of cribbing and then backfilling it with a soil type that's more conducive to trees. And then you put kind of a paver system on the top of that. These typically I've seen are part of the stormwater regulation. I've also seen where there are systems where the curb and gutter drains into these systems to water the trees, and then the overflow goes into a stormwater system. And so I think that this is perhaps another step that goes beyond Ken McKeith's role, but I think in the long run, there are lots of different alternatives, and perhaps most notable for Main Street on how we might manage a tree canopy. The last comment I would make is that as we walk Main Street, we see one variety of tree largely, and they're all roughly the same age. And so this is one of the things that we've identified as needing a real detailed landscaping plan to kind of plan for the eventual replacement of these trees, because they're aging, and in many cases, they're actually dying. And so we need to make sure that we place the tree in an appropriate course. And I suppose the Denver Water project and the replacement of the water main down Main Street is probably the project that will probably spark some kind of planning on our part. Otherwise, we'll just maybe be a little irresponsible here if we don't respond to that as an opportunity, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mark. Go to Pam.
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say a tree well is a tree and not open space. And I don't want us to get into a situation where a developer has a piece of land, they put a little tree in the corner and they said, see, we've got open space. So I think of course, the ones with the right of way, that makes sense. But putting a tree on a lot and counting it as open space, I think we're getting on a slippery slope.
We'll go Carol, Karina, then Patrick.
That was beautifully said, Pam. My general philosophy is the more trees, the better. At the same time, I am very cautious about planting a tree, counting as creating open space, because as Pam says, it's not the same thing.
Thank you. Karina?
Well, we saw the engineer and Mark come out on that question, didn't we? So I think the important distinction for me was what Brett said about green space versus open space. If you asked it to me as open space, I would say no. When you positioned it as green space, which means there's greenery in the space, then in that case, I would say a yes.
Great, thank you.
I'm with you, Karina. Nice job.
Good job. Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So yeah. So it looks like we are concerned about what we call open space. That's for sure. All right.
Yeah. Obviously, different character areas have different opportunities for creating "quote unquote" open space or pervious area. So your downtown Main Street and mixed-use areas have less opportunity for that in the way of yard space than you do neighborhood transition. So it's looking at kind of a collective of these different ways that we can create or preserve greenscape across downtown. So the next part of this is thinking in terms of public gathering areas, having plazas, which could have public art, could have fountains, could have peat walls, basically, tree wells or shrubs, garden areas, whatever that might be. That would be largely hardscape like a plaza, but again, it would be, public space. And that probably is more towards downtown Main Street and the mixed use area, less so the other two character areas.
Great. Thank you. All righty. All right. Let's go ahead and we'll go Pam, Carol, Karina, Patrick. All right, Pam.
When you use the word open space, you think of greenery and parks and what you're doing, like a number E, like Geneva Park up there. You don't think of it as hardscape. So if you want to think of that. I think gathering places are great, but those are patios or those are gathering areas. That's not really open space in my mind.
Great. All right, Carol?
Again, I agree with Pam that a gathering space isn't necessarily an open space. A gathering space can be really cluttered and not open at all. So I am very much in favor of each of them in different circumstances.
Yeah. Karina?
Pretty much echoing the same. I think plazas absolutely have a place in our downtown and in many downtowns, and they're very appropriate. I think a plaza is a plaza and open space is something else. In more of the general terms of open space, that would be obviously green space. So to me, are plazas appropriately in the downtown area? Absolutely. I don't know that I would classify it as an open space or a green space.
Great, thank you. Patrick?
I agree with Pam, Carol, and Karina.
All right, thank you. All right, and I'm a yes on that. I think it is. Depending on the design, I think it can be a yes. Kelly?
Depending on the design and if it's located in that downtown or mixed use area, I think it can be fantastic addition to those places for gathering. And I'm sure that with all the creative juices flowing out there, we can get some really cool ideas for those places.
Great. Was that a yes? I missed what you said. Okay, cool. Thank you. Scott?
I think that a plaza can be a tremendous enhancement to the character of an area. I would not want a developer to be able to trade not having to do any work for the ecological health of the city and the downtown in exchange for putting in this sort of public gathering space. And I guess just to add to that, I would say that, while I would support a lot of what we've been talking about, I don't by any means think that it goes far enough. And I guess I'm still anticipating a more extended conversation on open space and some of the things that have been mentioned over the course of various council discussions, things like wildlife corridors, xeric and native plantings, the diversity of our tree canopy, comments like marks, disincentivizing water intensive bluegrass, turf, all that kind of stuff. So while I'm in support of what we're talking about, I don't think it goes nearly far enough in the ecological discussion that we have to have.
Good point. And I think maybe somewhere down the road, we do need to have a discussion on what do we consider the open space. Just like what Scott said, just because it's open doesn't mean it's what we want. But again, if it's properly designed, it'd be great with the right fence. All right, are we on to 7E now?
Yeah, this one is a gimme. This one should be pretty straightforward and simple, I would imagine.
You would think.
Yes.
All right, I got a Patrick said yes. Karina?
Sorry. Yes, I had to find my button.
Okay. All right, Carol?
Yes.
Pam? God.
Yes, with all the caveats I just mentioned.
You bet. They were excellent. Kelly?
More greenways, more public parks. Yes, yes, yes.
And I am also a yes. We're down to our 3 more to go, Council. We're moving along.
Okay, the next one is having standards that would require the preservation of existing urban tree canopy. Basically, that would include protection standards during construction and incentives for preserving rather than tearing down and planting tiny whips.
Okay,
so, yeah, this is an important one, so we really understand the position of council. I think I know, but how hard of a line we want to take on tree preservation.
Yeah, I think you got it. Pam?
Yes, we want to preserve our trees.
Absolutely. Scott and Kelly?
We
Yeah, I
just all
think
leave our-
generally,
Yeah, just leave your off mute so we can talk and move on.
Well, Tyler gets feedback every once in a while, so. I
Yeah.
mean, normally the instruction's been to put it on mute, but I'm happy to leave it off if that's what
We're
Tyler
doing
wants us
yes,
to do.
no's. Let's.
Okay. Were you a yes, Scott?
Well, I'm going to say in general, yeah, of course, I'm in favor of preserving our tree canopy, but I think it also matters what kind of tree we're talking about and where it's at in its life cycle. Over time, we want healthy trees and we want a diverse tree canopy.
Good point. Good point.
Anyway.
Yeah, Kelly? Kelly's a yes. I'm a yes. Patrick?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Scott there. He said it well there.
Karina?
I'm a yes. I think this is actually very important. I mean, think about the Littleton tree program every year. We celebrate our crabapple trees. And actually, I have, a story from someone that lived downtown, and when a development right next to him, there was this lovely, whatever, call it 100-year-old tree, a very mature tree, and then it was gone. So I think it's incredibly important.
Yep. And Carol?
Yes.
Great. All right. Moving along.
I believe we could probably take the last two together because they are similar. One of those is rooftop gardens, and the other is a green roof.
All right. So the question is, are they considered open space?
Should they be considered as contributing toward the overall greening of downtown collectively, I guess?
All righty.
And whether or not you want to allow them.
All right, Karina.
I'm sorry, for me, I do separate them. I would say a yes for rooftop gardens because it creates it's a little bit more of a gathering space. The green roofs oftentimes will not even be visible. So it's not a place that you would engage in. It's just another roofing material, to be quite honest with you. So I would say yes to the rooftop garden, no to the green roof.
Patrick?
I'm with Karina. Perfect.
Okay. All right. And I am a no. While I like them both, I don't think, I was taking that to think as an open space type. That's how I was looking at the question. I don't know why, but that's why I said no. But I'm totally in favor of both of those, no matter what. Kelly?
I'm in favor of both of them too, but that's where you're going to need a flat roof. It's not going to work on that 512 pitch.
All right, Scott?
Yeah. And I forgot, the beekeeping question came off of this round of questions. And this is a perfect place to mention it. I am all about people keeping bees anywhere in the downtown, and especially on their rooftop gardens.
But why don't we make that as, I want to save that for the last question. Why don't we, Pam?
I am all in favor of rooftop gardens and green roofs. I think they're a great addition to any building. I do not think they should be considered open space because I foresee a builder would say, oh, lot line to lot line, I don't care, I've got my open space on the ceiling, when we really want open space on the sides in front of the building.
Carol?
I think they do not count as open space at all because they aren't perceptible to people on the street level.
Excellent. All right. Hey, on the question of the bees, that I thought for some reason, Scott, thanks for bringing that back up. Why don't we just go through real quick and see? Could you pose a question as far as on that, Brett? Was that your question or was that a Kathleen question?
Might have been a Kathleen question. I know I saw it. So that would be.
This was the question that Brett, you had posed as part of the policy discussion for the 19th of May. So it was one of the questions.
Okay, so why don't we hold off until we hear more information about it? But I think it's worth talking about at some point. All right. I think that's all your questions.
It is.
I think Pam has a question.
I have a kind of a general question. we want to maintain the character and the quaintness and the feeling of downtown Littleton, and I think you've gotten a lot of direction on that. But a lot of the integrity's been lost. So how do we maintain what we've got, preserve some of the older buildings, and still be authentic and look forward, because we can't quite look backward. We don't want to make it fake. We don't want to make it look like a Hollywood set or something. So how do we do that? I mean, maybe it's a question for Brett, or maybe it's more of a Nori, who's the historic building expert.
Nori, you want to take that?
Sure. I think the way of expressing the authenticity is at I guess I would call it a skeletal level, understanding the basic framework that makes up the design traditions of downtown, that rhythm of 25 to 50 foot wide building modules in the commercial area, for example, or the use of sloping roof forms in the residential area. It's not saying it's got to be Italianate or Greek revival. It's understanding at a more fundamental level what those factors are that contribute to the visual continuity, the sense of place. So that's why we've been looking at scale at the street level, the relationship of the building front to the sidewalk edge. Is it at the sidewalk edge or set back, depending on if you're in that residential area or commercial area? The palette of building materials that are the same as or appear similar to those used traditionally, and that are detailed in a way that convey authenticity. Those are all things that we're working on and outlining the draft for the design standards. People, it's a wonderful question, because I think people often think that to fit in, you have to copy the style. But you can imagine you can do a 350 foot long building with Italian brackets on it. That will be wrong, because it's not in a fundamental way responding to those traditional framework elements. Once you've defined those, you set a certain limit, but you also set a degree of flexibility or freedom for designers to work within that and to do something new and different that isn't a phony copy.
That makes a lot of sense. When we see future examples, can we see them, that things that fit in rather than these big boxy things, lot line to lot line?
Yes, we are going to be including some photographic example buildings for each of the building types, along with the sketch models that you've been seeing. And we'll also be careful about the viewpoints.
And would they be more Colorado rather than East Coast examples?
Yes, most of them are from this area. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, thank you.
Great. All right, we're gonna go Scott, then Karina.
I was surprised that the question about should the city regulate building materials and colors came off this list. That seems like, and has always seemed like, a pretty fundamental input into character to me. And I just am wondering from the consultants, is that something that we're going to get to, or what's the status of that question?
We're expecting it's going to be included in the draft. So we've discussed internally, primarily on the types of building materials that are appropriate in the context and character of the different areas, whether they are, a near or complementing historic, or whether it might be more the residential area. So having the traditional materials that are, I think, would be appropriate in these areas. So yes, there will be a material palette that is addressed. Nori, I don't know.
Yeah, that topic is already in your current design standards, and they actually do make some distinctions about context. And so we're taking those ideas and bringing them forward into the draft. And so the idea is that the range or the palette of materials can change by character area. And obviously in the downtown neighborhood. There are going to be ones that are more scaled and similar to the traditional brick and lap siding that you would expect to see there. Whereas in the mixed use area, there's opportunity for a little bit more flexibility, but still setting some percentages of materials that convey a scale and texture that are similar to those used traditionally.
Great, thank you. Karina.
I wanted to have a further dialogue on the boundaries of mixed use. So I know we talked about the area to the north specifically, but there were little pockets of mixed use in places that just didn't seem appropriate to me. Would this be a good time to relook at the map and understand some of those unique cutouts, or how can we address that? So to use an example, we have mixed use going down, I think it's Rapp Street. So it would, you know, where we now have Dirt Coffee Bar and a little salon there, that would now be mixed use, which means those particular buildings would be susceptible to a 4-story, more commercial looking block building. So there was just these little areas that just seemed off to me. I don't know if this would be a good time to look at them, or how you would like to address them in a future time.
I feel like we're a little ill-prepared for a detailed discussion on the boundaries without having all the maps and so forth available to facilitate that conversation. Kathleen, did you want to weigh in terms of how you think that process might be better or best facilitated?
Well, I think I'd be looking to you to see on timing and get a sense of when we can have that conversation. Can we still have it on the 30th and incorporate that into our already scheduled joint session with Planning Commission? Or are we up against needing to sort of vet that out prior to that conversation on the 30th?
I think the driving force behind our timing is primarily on the drafting the regulations. The map boundaries, you know, can kind of, could probably happen on the 30th without, you know, I guess our time and work right now is focused on drafting the regulations. So if the mapping piece comes along a little later, that's not going to bother us any. So whether we want to have another conversation like this, or whether it's better done by circulating maps and getting comments from different council members and then seeing, you know, where there's consensus. Whether
the one benefit, I was going to say, the one benefit we have is that could be a joint conversation with Planning Commission. That's what we have scheduled on the 30th. So I'd love to hear some feedback from council. They see that as a benefit, or?
I'd also like to suggest that, I mean, what we've learned tonight is helping us hone exactly what these different character areas will be like. And that's going to inform perhaps refining some of those boundary edges. Now that we have a clearer idea about height and open space and things like that, I think internally we need to work on that. We may want to tweak the boundaries some and then bring a new map back for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Pam?
I agree with Nori. I think what he's heard tonight, I also agree with Karina. What we want to maintain those buildings, even if they're used for commercial use, and avoid high rises where we don't need them, that would detract from our character. So I bet you that they could tweak the map based on our conversation, and I bet you would be pretty darn close.
Good. Scott?
You know, it's been said throughout the envision process that one of the main features of character is parking, and it's also been said all along that phase 2 is when we're going to start talking about parking, and I'm wondering sort of where that's gone.
Yeah, we are scheduled to start drafting the parking standards here in about a week and a half, and working that through with staff. So that will be coming forward as part of the draft. So that can certainly be a consideration for our internal work. What I might suggest is that our consulting team and staff get together and lay out maybe some adjustments to the boundaries and then circulate that around council. And if council wants to mark that up and make any notes and get them back to staff, then we would have an opportunity to look at all those and make any further changes before we get together again on the 30th. So there would be hopefully very few remaining adjustments by the time we're to June 30th.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I just wonder if, I mean, because it's such an important topic, if it isn't better to have it be discussed in a study session like this before we get to the draft. I don't know.
Well, we could. You see, we're on the 2nd, so we could do something mid-June and just primarily focus it on if there's anything else that we wanted to run by you after we've heard tonight, and then primarily focus on the boundaries. That could be done.
Great, thank you. And I want to make a comment if I too, Brett, and then we'll get to Pam. Yeah, I was on planning commission for about 12 years, and many times I saw developers come to us with something that was kind of like the latest fad designs. And then I would see that same design maybe in Aurora. And even when I went to Alaska, I saw the same designs in Aurora. Nothing unique about them. And I guess what I don't want to see Littleton become, at least our football area. There's going to be change. I understand that. But I just don't want the football area particularly to become just another downtown that you can see like in any town USA. Littleton has always had its unique flavor to it, like many other communities. I just don't want it to see it come to kind of the latest fad for these developers to come in. So if you can help us to draft something that will help us to prevent that. Pam?
Agreed.
It seems like there's a couple things that we want to discuss in more detail: the map, parking, beekeeping. I don't understand the pros and cons of beekeeping in an urban area. Another thing is density. We talked about that in our last list of questions, but we haven't addressed that at all. Does that come in with lot size, or can you make apartments or townhouses just smaller and smaller and smaller, or how does that work?
Is that a topic you want to discuss at another meeting in a couple of weeks?
I would like to. I think we ran into that with the Grove and the high density area there that was very controversial.
Great. Carol?
I too would like to address density, what it is, and how to figure out how much of it we want.
Great, thank you. Council, any other questions? Karina?
Because everybody's throwing something in. I think that you mentioned this earlier, and I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. You were talking about the width of buildings and how they would be different by different areas. So downtown neighborhood might allow so much width versus Main Street might allow a different width. Did I hear you correctly that that's going to be space? That we'll be addressing width?
Yes.
Something like that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so wouldn't the length, width, and height and use by default we're covering that, right? Kind of.
You're covering massing, not density, right?
Massing, not density.
Well,
Okay.
yeah,
Density
when you
influences parking.
right, when we calculate, just quickly, when we calculate density, primarily since we are establishing building scale and bulk and height and width and so forth, we're creating a box, and then within that, the density is going to be predicated upon the size of individual units. So we're talking about residential units. It's a mix of, efficiency, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms, and establishing the minimum lot area per dwelling unit. So we can drill down into that conversation deeper. Parking does add to it. Obviously, more units, more people, more parking required. So we can kind of lay out for you the inputs to figure out density and then decide if we would just want to set a maximum density number based upon, that's predicated upon the building types and forms that we've already laid out.
Great. I think Pam has one more than Karina, then we'll try to get out of here.
Okay, one of the things that we didn't address again tonight, and you talked about unlisted uses, is land use. I mean, is that something we need to address, or are you good with that from our comments?
Yeah. So what's going to be coming forward will be a land use matrix that will identify the different land uses and what districts they are permitted or specially permitted in. Obviously, we try to group land use categories and then define them. So we're not trying to list every conceivable land use. At some point, somebody might bring in a use that is not clear or is not covered by the use matrix. So we have a provision in our ordinance that says for those uses that are unlisted, that there would be a process to determine what character area, in this case, that use could be permitted in. And there's a list of criteria that starts to look at, you know, the scale of the use, the operational characteristics, lighting, noise, hours of operation, that will help usually staff to make a recommendation as to whether or not that use fits into the different character areas.
It sounds like that we don't need to discuss that. It's already along.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's pretty standard language that you'll see in most ordinances.
Thank you.
All right, Karina.
So if, as we prepare for this next discussion, when we talk about massing and density and actually land use, so that was a little bit of my question as well. They all kind of play together. It's you kind of need to know the mass may inform the density, and the density may inform or limit the uses. So you kind of have to think of all them together, right? So maybe help us to make sure that we're thinking of them together when we're making those decisions, because yeah.
Again, the building types and building forms is a driving factor here. So other than the uses that you've already looked at during phase one that are not appropriate within the character of downtown, there's less emphasis on use, but more on the design of buildings, the scale of buildings, and how they operate within the downtown context. But there will be a use matrix that will identify the different uses that are permitted or especially permitted in the different character areas. So that will be coming forward to you. And we're happy to talk about how we can back into a density number.
Great. Thank you very much. Brett and Nori and Kathleen, thank you for getting these guys together with us. If nothing else on this subject, then we're going to move on. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very kindly for all your input. Hugely helpful to us. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Kathleen. All right, at this point in our meeting, we're getting close and we're at the administrative updates. We get to the city manager, and I've been excited about this one all night, Mark. This better be good.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, Council. So, yeah, I think there are just a series of topics here that I want to touch on, and it has to do with kind of the ever-changing state health department orders. And I'm going to ask our city attorney, Reed, kind of add to this update here as appropriate. I do want to talk a little bit also about some of the demonstrations that's happening in our metro area here and what is the Littleton Police Department doing or not doing largely, and kind of talk a little bit about that. So I think on the state health orders, there's been one conversation that myself and the mayor participated in on Friday morning, along with the county commissioners and mayors and managers of other cities throughout Arapahoe County. And part of the discussion was whether or not variances were an issue for which the county and the cities should perhaps consider, and in essence, the county pursue. And just as a reminder, the county is the one that can pursue a variance throughout the county. It's business type oriented. It's not by city. or location. And so that's by the state health department orders. So as an example, some of the things that we talked about in that meeting, there are some unique exceptions like the Aurora Mall or Top Golf and Centennial that are a unique business type for which the county may consider a variance depending on its operational plan. One of the issues that we did discuss was restaurants. And I'm sure we've all heard that through the Restaurant Association largely, that one of the kind of break-even points for them is really having a capacity at about 75%. And so that was raised on Friday morning as whether or not the cities and specifically the county may want to pursue a variance around that topic. And there is a process, and Reed certainly can add to this, but it is heavily reliant upon data, and it is has to be looked at industry-wide throughout the county. And again, not city by city. And so there are definitely challenges with that. And but I think it is something that even in the conversation through email here with other city managers here over the weekend, I can tell that this is just being considered, and I'm not sure exactly where this will go. And the last piece of this, of course, is the governor himself and the state health department. It looks like there are additional regulations being considered to perhaps loosen that up. And so let me just pause for a second here and see if Reed wants to kind of weigh in here a little bit about some of those topics. And quite honestly, the ever-changing landscape here with the state health department orders.
Yeah, and I guess I would echo everything that you had to say, Mark. Yesterday, the governor issued an executive order extending this Safer at Home to July 1st. And so kind of what we've been existing under for the last month, a lot of our retailers, currently that's scheduled for yet another month. He has issued a directive to CDPHE, our Colorado Department of Public Health, to look into regulations regarding recreation, pools. I know that there's probably a lot of HOAs that are looking for guidance in terms of whether or not they can open their pools. It's my understanding that that is going to come out tomorrow in terms of what that looks like, in terms of what that capacity looks like. And so, yeah, we're still kind of in a wait and see mode in terms of how some of these restrictions that we've been operating under, or some of our retailers and business owners have been operating under, kind of unfold over the next month.
So let me kind of make a connection here now from this countywide variance consideration and really the changing landscape for restaurants to our Main Street, weekends on Main Street. As we earlier reported here, it looks like now June 12th is the consensus for which this would start. As we shared with council last week, we would be doing a survey roughly after 2 weeks of all the businesses and property owners to get a feel for how well this is going. So I think it's also an opportunity for assess what is going on here through the governor's office with restaurants. And if we are able to move to a higher percentage of occupancy, then we have to ask ourselves the question about what is the applicability back towards our Main Street and whether or not perhaps that ends sooner than what we anticipated, say, a month ago. So I think there's that. In fact, we shared a little of that conversation with the RISE committee here earlier today. So I think there just needs to be a recognition that the landscape is changing almost every day. I think we've put some plans in place that kind of make sense, but I think we just need to be poised and ready to kind of reconsider some of these actions just based on what happens here, using the restaurants as an example. I think we did have a meeting this morning for which we invited all of the restaurants and those participating on the kind of the right-of-way space. And that actually was a real positive meeting. That's when we got consensus on the June 12th. We also then had another meeting here where we sent approximately 700 notifications to businesses throughout the city. And we kind of opened this up as a conversation about how to activate private and public space here for not just restaurants, but quite honestly, any kind of retail. So we did get about 30 RSVPs for that meeting. We had only, unfortunately, about 10 people participate in that. And some of them, quite honestly, were a repeat here from even Main Street. But the purpose of that, I think, as Councilmember Driscoll reported, was to share with them that we do have easy access to a permit process. So if they are interested, we're trying to activate that or respond to that as quickly as possible. All of that just tells me that we need to keep the effort up about communicating really what's going on and kind of how the regulations are changing. I think our businesses are really struggling trying to keep up with all this. Clearly, we as the city, we're doing our best to keep up with this, but as Reed reported, we have over 100 orders coming out of the governor's office. The farmers market, I think there was a question about that. It is actually June 6th is the first one. It is from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And it's an example where we've been trying to work with, in this case, Aspen Grove, to kind of activate the space as best we can and assist them. And they actually had a great report here as part of the RISE meeting here earlier today. And I think they really appreciate the effort that they've been getting from the city, as well as all the other internal merchants and business owners they've got within Aspen Grove. All right, the other thing that Councilmember Milliman commented on, was the library and the museum. I think those are two facilities for which there's been a lot of conversation internally about what are we going to do to perhaps phase this in. And the first phase is really activating the outdoor space around the museum. We raised that as probably one of the first opportunities because in the metro area, there's been some examples where, in this case, the Botanical Gardens was able to get an exception. And so obviously it's not exactly the same, but Tim Nims has been in contact with his peers. And I think all the libraries and museums are trying to work towards some common understanding of what might be possible. We know in the governor's list of issues to address, so we know it's a little bit of later of a priority, but we're just trying to do some advanced planning here so that hopefully we've got something that'll make sense and try to activate that as quickly as possible. So those are a couple of quick updates on the state health order. I do want to talk about kind of the next round of grants, but I want to pause there and see if there's any questions.
Mark, if we could go back, because when we talked about the museum of opening up the yard, that would mean not opening up the building itself, but at least we could open it up to the grounds itself.
Correct, the exterior, yeah. So trying to activate that space in many different ways, not just the living history, the farm animals, but here and maybe some other different ways. So Tim has got a kind of a list of considerations here, and that's what we're trying to focus on here for the first.
Thank you.
Yes, Karina.
On that, Mark, when you say phase one, like how quickly do you expect the outdoor grounds to open up?
Well, we have to have an exception from the state. And so that's the plan itself. We're trying to pattern that perhaps off, and we're using Botanical Gardens because that's the one that seems most applicable and has been approved. So I don't have a timeline. The other consideration that we do need to look at here on the part of council is just our fiscal condition here and whether or not we can afford to open it up. We'll talk about that here in the third week of June. So that seems to be coming together pretty well. So if we have a plan in place and we believe we can get the state approval of that plan, then we can also tie together that with the kind of the fiscal piece of this thing and make a decision once and for all how we might proceed.
All right, so I'm going to follow up to that question. Reed, were you going to jump in? Because I was going to mention you.
Oh, no. I was just going to add that, the Denver Zoo is probably another type of kind of outdoor space that has applied for a variance from the state. They were approved by their local county, i.e. Denver Public Health did approve their plan. I don't know if they've gotten confirmation back from the state, but that is yet kind of another one of these outdoor type areas that we're hoping to kind of model in terms of if they're successful, how the museum might be able to kind of take that plan and put that into effect.
Okay, so thank you. So Hudson Gardens is open as well, the gardens area. So they either got an exception or perhaps, I'm not sure how they did it. And obviously they're in our county, so that would probably be good for us to look at. And Reed, when you and I had talked about this, I had mentioned this before about opening up the outdoor space or the for the museum. So we Reed, if you recall the conversation we had, that was like grounds, and it was like open space and grounds of the city. So it wasn't the facility, city facility. So it was, you know, kind of considered gardens or parks. So it maybe did not fall in under that category of a museum. So I wonder if, like what we did for downtown, this is something that we can just get guidance from Tri-County or Arapahoe County, as opposed to kind of the long pole in the tent, which is the state, because they get so many requests. Do you think this might be an opportunity we can just run by the county?
Yeah, I can certainly look into it. I think part of the issue will be, how do you kind of social distance within that area? I mean, all of our city parks are open to some extent, and people can generally, you know, steer clear of each other and, you know, sit in the grass wherever they want. But perhaps, you know, just with your entrance into the museum, at least how you typically get in, you're going kind of through that one way, but there are certainly other ways to get into the museum. So that's something we'll certainly talk with Tim Nims about.
That'd be great. I mean, we have the outdoor gates and things like that. So I have another question for Mark regarding the kind of the new orders. The new orders are safer at home and the vast outdoors. So it gives us, gives a little bit more opportunity for some of this vast outdoor description of what is the vast outdoors. So we talked about the museum. Some of the other exceptions that we can get by business that have been some of the variances, the mall, the Topgolf. If we were to think about Breckenridge Brewery or even Angelo's Tavern, they're in a very open space. So there's something very unique about their environment that may not be the same in other parts of the state. I wonder if there's something along our river corridor businesses like Breckenridge Brewery and the Tavern that there is a good case to be made from a variance perspective. And if they would be interested, for that matter.
I think based on my read of the conversation Friday morning, that's not likely. I don't think the county commissioners were interested in trying to be more specific in location. What you described are two business types that are different, but they're not as unique as a Topgolf. And so I think the county may be interested. They certainly be probably welcome the conversation, but in the end, trying to get a variance would have to be based on industry type. And I know maybe Reed, if you got a comment on that, but that's largely what we were hearing from the county so far.
I would just kind of echo what you've been hearing. That's similar to what I've been hearing. It's really about the business model, getting exceptions countywide and not necessarily specific type locations that, you know, while the river corridor is unique, there's a lot of open air restaurants and a lot of restaurants in Arapahoe County that have plenty of open air seating. So that may be challenging.
But again, I think the point is we're starting to push that conversation, and I think that is a positive sign here. And I do believe the governor is trying to respond to this the best he can. So there's perhaps a lot of energy around this, and maybe over the next couple of weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that changes again.
Yep.
So
Kelly, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question about the restaurant specifically in Aspen Grove, but I'll circle back to the museum. At the meeting last night when and Mark, you could probably speak to this too as well, for stage one, they did say that the farm sites in the main building would be open, but for limited hours. And I believe that they're going to require reservations, and there would be a 50-person limit capacity in the entire complex. So I'm not sure how that plays in with, opening the grounds up and, and that sort of thing. And I think, as stage two comes along and that date is to be developed, it all sort of depends on interest and also what the virus is doing, in the community. Is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, I think the reservation concept is something that definitely in the short run, we believe is going to be required. That is a requirement of the botanical gardens in Denver. So that's likely what will have to happen here. I think the days of the week and the hours of operation is perhaps going to be more of a fiscal, financial decision than anything else. And so I think that's why they all need to come together here in about 2 weeks is my hope. And we'll have a much better idea really where this can go.
So, thank you. And so my question about the restaurants in Aspen Grove, as far as it relates to weekends on Main, is so they can be a part of that program as well, and then they will be able to bring their tables out onto the larger sidewalks. Is that how it's gonna? Is that how you're envisioning it, or is it?
There are two distinct approaches. The weekend on Main Street is kind of largely a city-led event. What Aspen Grove is pursuing is kind of this other piece that I mentioned, where we have this kind of permit process so that businesses can activate their private space as well as any kind of public space if that's something you want to consider. So Aspen Grove is pursuing the latter, and that's what they've been working on here.
So both of those, Councilman Member Milliman, require what are called temporary modification of premises. If they have a liquor license, that's what needs to go to the state. So whether the event or whether your restaurant is on Main Street or Aspen Grove, you have to fill out the same sort of permit. It's just a little bit of a different process for them. But we are in the process of getting those to the state, and hopefully they can expand out onto kind of the sidewalk area, at least out into Aspen Grove.
So Mayor, if you don't mind, I want to provide a quick update on grants.
Please.
So at the previous study session, we laid out kind of a list of issues that we were suggesting to council that we pursue here as part of the CARES Act. And we were recommending kind of a rough allocation here of about 500,000. Council obviously will have a lot of decision-making here on later in time. We did go back and look at the first round of grants that the city pursued here for our businesses. And we were suggesting that maybe let's start with going back and looking at those businesses that actually applied and qualified for our program and see what that looked like and what that told us. And so doing that, we had what looked like 101 applications that did meet that city requirement. And so for funding at the same level that we did last time, that'd be about $127,000, $127,500. I think we're now in the process of working with the county to make sure that if we recommend this to council, that it meets the qualification of the CARES Act. And I think we're just right in the middle of that process. We're trying to coordinate with the Treasury Department, other cities, and making sure that we have kind of this common approach. So if you remember here, the county's also interested in doing some business grants. And so we're just trying to establish different thresholds between what the county's doing and what the city's doing. So again, it's an update, but we're making progress.
And I actually had a call with the county attorney and other city attorneys in Arapahoe County regarding that very specific issue. And it looks really promising in terms of being able to give money to a lot of these businesses that maybe didn't make it in time for ours. But in terms of the criteria, it looks really good. And Mark and I will talk about that tomorrow.
Mark, you might want to check your math on that. I'm coming up with 250,000, not 127,000.
Yeah.
At 2,500 a piece is what you're calculating, right?
Yes, correct. Yes, that's not very good math. So thank you.
Nope, just want to make sure we're shortchanging anybody.
That's why we have Tiffany.
That's correct. Exactly. Thank you. Okay, unless there's any other questions about kind of the state health.
Karina has a question there, I think.
Yes.
So regarding the grants, I think what's important and what I've been hearing in other jurisdictions is that the next round, something for us to consider in the next round of grant, and I don't know if it's this that you may have just suggested, but with more time we can, or I don't know when, how, and to what degree we're going to look at that. But The criteria that is being used is very intentional and purposeful so that we really get the results that we want. So I know that our initial grant was intended to be quick, responsive, but what is proven to be the best approach is what is much more sustainable and to a certain degree equitable, as well as getting the result that we want, that there are businesses that we know we want to ensure succeed, and how do we give them that opportunity for a lot of various criteria, right? So I just don't want to lose sight of the selection process is very important.
Correct. Yeah. And as we mentioned a week ago, the council could look, saying you bought into this concept here of what the second round might be, a third round for which it's wide open about how the council may want to set up that criteria. And if you want to pursue that or not, you certainly have the ability to do that at the second round if you prefer. But at least we thought we'd start with some basic information and bring that back to you so you can make a decision. But absolutely.
125,000 and 250 are really, that's a big range. So that's an important factor, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
I do just want to touch on, obviously, the demonstrations that are going on here throughout the country, and certainly in Denver. There are a lot of police departments providing service here to Denver as they try to manage some of the crowds at the demonstration and some of the problems. The Littleton Police Department is not directly involved in Denver. We are providing some backup, SWAT backup to perhaps some other jurisdictions who are participating. Douglas County is probably an example. So at this moment in time, the Littleton Police Department is not involved in really direct support here for what's going on in Denver. There's been, some sporadic questions from the public here about the potential of problems that may be here in our community. And we just don't see, there's no indication, no intel, nothing that tells us that we are at least being considered for that. I think we have seen perhaps an example. I'm understanding that Castle Rock perhaps saw something today, but at this moment in time, we do not see that as an issue here. Also, I think we've been replying here to some citizens about some of our own standards and how we manage some difficult events. And I think that I'm considering some kind of a statement here so that we can share this publicly. But as the council knows, we have bought into what we call the CALEA standards. Only 10% of our police departments across the country have CALEA approved standards. There's over 300 of them. And so we have bought into a series of best practices here that we believe, combined with that and our method of neighborhood policing, that we're at a standard high above most in the country. And so we believe that we have a proper context here when it comes to this kind of injustice. Obviously, it disturbs us all deeply, and we sympathize for those who find themselves here in similar positions. But we believe we just have a culture here that's just different than other parts of the country.
And we've had that certification for 12 years now.
It's been going on for some years. I can't tell you exactly, but obviously we're pretty proud of that. Council's actually financially supported that through some accreditation costs and stuff. So again, it's a pretty high standard that this community, this police department has bought into.
Yep.
I think Chief Stevens did a great job in his response today. I think it was just, speaks to the accreditation. So I think Chief did a really great job in his response, and please thank him.
Yes, I will. Thank you for that. And I think that's my updates, unless council's got any questions.
Well, let's move on to Reed. Reed, he used up most of your time.
He did, so nothing further for me.
All right. Well, council, just want to remind you then that our next meeting is next Tuesday. It's a study session. Our next regular meeting is the 16th. And June 10th, that was set for a meet, greet, and eat. That has been canceled. So if we have nothing else, council, it is 9:10 p.m. We are adjourned. Thank you.